And you and I were talking about this, and I thought it was very unique because Aikido and an Uchideshi program is, few and far between. Not a lot of dojos, like a very, very tiny percent actually had the program and or have the program and offer it.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there's very few Aikido people that kind of embark on a real strict Sotodeshi track or course, if you will. So that was my background. Yours was Uchideshi. I was like, let's share some insight on the differences. So I want to start with, actually, why don't you define what is an Aikido Uchideshi and what is an Uchideshi program?
Yeah. I imagine that a lot of people, when they think of the martial arts, they actually, without realizing it, they're thinking about an Uchideshi program, as opposed to what they end up doing, which is just studying a martial art for sort of recreation. Because they see the training montages in movies like the Karate Kid and that kind of thing. Which is actually, I would say, a Karate Kid montage is closer to like a Sotodeshi experience, because he would go home in the evenings and come back the next day.
Right.
So in Uchideshi, so literally translates inside student, right? Uchi, and if you train in Aikido, one of the things that you realize is you learn Uchi and Soto variations of techniques, right? So you actually learn the useful meaning of that word. So Uchideshi is an experience where you actually live in the dojo full time, and in very many cases, dojos are not really, even those that have these programs are not necessarily designed for these experiences. So there's no sort of deshi quarters, living quarters. So there are very famous stories of Uchideshi experiences in places like New York Aikikai, where, Uchideshi were living, like when I first moved in, would live on the mat, or would, live on the couch, or, would then graduate. In the New York Aikikai case, they had apartments above the dojo. In my case, I graduated to having an inflatable mattress in the men's changing room after everybody left for the evening. But yeah, so that was the experience for me. But I know in your case, though, sort of a similar experience was Sotodeshi, as opposed to Uchideshi experience. But I mean, quite a grueling experience as well. Just got to go home at night.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a difference, and I think we were talking about this last week, but and you can touch on this, but you're living in the dojo, so you're doing anywhere from 3 to probably 6 to 8 classes a day, and when you're not training, you're maintaining the dojo, you're cleaning it, you're helping the chief instructor. It's a full-time apprenticeship. Where as Sotodeshi, I was doing a third of that, if you will. There was 2 to 3 classes a day, every day, and some early cleaning beforehand, about an hour before we started, and then a lot of staying after late, and social waza, as you're doing now, and more cleaning. So totally different. And then but I think the biggest takeaway is I got to go home and sleep on a Queen Tempur-Pedic mattress.
There's a bit of a
Yes.
I was gonna say, the main responsibilities. I imagine there's a tremendous amount of crossover, because as sort of the last person to really be an Uchideshi with Stickle Sensei before, I think the reality for Stickle Sensei that happened as that was sort of coming to its end was, it became clear that no one else was going to be moving in. It became clear that, at least for the time being, it became clear that nobody else was looking for that experience at that time. And but there was a need for those that kind of responsibility at the dojo. And so the Sotodeshi thing became a real possibility, because there still were, this idea of dojo rats, that which is actually sort of a colloquial term among many dojos. This idea of people who really hang out a lot, and people who really devote themselves to the practice, but they might be a little older. They're not, 17, 18, 19-year-olds, and can't necessarily give up their lives to, sleep in the dojo. But they can spend a good deal of their time in the dojo, so they can help with cleaning, and they can help with private lessons. They can help with kids programs. They can help with all kinds of things to keep the dojo community alive.
Yeah, good point. I kind of look at it like this: the difference between a committed student that's training in almost every class versus a Sotodeshi is what happens off the mat, before, after, and what happens in your mindset. You've really committed to not just the training. You've committed to the chief instructor, to the school. It's a different commitment level. I was
going to say,
yeah. No one can dispute that living in the dojo. I mean, there's not a stronger commitment. Look at Yamada Sensei's first day in Aikido was Uchideshi for Sensei. I mean, Donovan Wade, I want to say Donovan Wade Sensei spent 10 years, maybe almost 15 years as Uchideshi and Aikikai. And obviously our friend Mike Jones was one of the last head deshis there that just had a great training background there. What I want to ask you now is real fast, describe like a typical day as Uchideshi, from the time you wake up to the time you go to bed.
So the severity involved in that experience depends on the time of year. Obviously this was New Jersey, right? So, but generally, and the time of the week, but a weekday, generally you wake up around 5 a.m. Because during the week there are 6 a.m. classes. So you wake up at 5 a.m. You want to make sure that the temperature in the dojo is correct for 6 a.m. class. You want to make sure the dojo is open around 5:30. The dojo has to be clean. Now this is an industrial space, so you want to make sure that dust is cleaned out of the space. You want to make sure everything is vacuumed clean. You want to make sure that everything has been dusted. You want to make sure that everything is, of course, turned on, and the space is ready to receive students. If you're not teaching, you want to make sure that whoever is teaching has everything they need. So you're essentially acting as sort of a mini Otomo in that case for whoever's instructing. In the sense that you're not sort of catering to their every need, but you do want to make sure that their experience instructing is as seamless as possible. And that has less to do with one of the really, really impressive things about Stigl Sensei is his background in theater. Really played a role in how he ran his dojo. He used to talk about this all the time. He used to talk about things like sight lines and anytime that you had storage, everything you should never be able to see anything that was being stored, no matter which angle you looked at it from. And so everything was a production for him. Everything had to be done in a way that it came off as though it was effortless. So
intentional
it should appear,
too.
Yeah, and everything was intentional. And so you very much did everything in that way. And so after 6 a.m. class, you made sure that everybody had a seamless experience getting off the mat, getting them out of the dojo, of course. And then, of course, locking up. That was your time now to clean very quickly and eat. And then usually there was a bit of a break there when you were done, breakfast, something like that. If you had anything to eat in the dojo, usually some students would leave food for you. You were sometimes at the mercy of your seniors. And quite often what was nice was if you had senpai who really took you under their wing, and I had a number of them who I'm very, very grateful for, would bring things like Gatorade and would bring things like, nature valley bars, those ones that like made crumbs everywhere.
Yeah.
And so they'd leave like food for you. And so you'd be able to survive. And then you'd have private lessons throughout the day, noon class, and then kids classes before adult classes in the evening. And then of course, cleaning before bed. Usually you're in bed around, 10 o'clock at the very latest, if you can get everybody out of the dojo as quickly as you can, because you have to be up at 5 again. But yeah. Wow. Yeah. That's kind of every day, except for the weekends when one of the things that was very cool about ASNJ was Stigl Sensei had a relationship. He lives in California now, but he had a relationship with a Tibetan Buddhist teacher, Dean Slider, who would teach a free meditation session every Sunday morning, which was good and bad in the sense that you never had a day off, in other words, because I had to be up every Sunday morning at 8 a.m. to get the dojo ready for this meditation circle. So there was no sleeping in any day of the week. And so, yeah, you couldn't ask for a better experience. You couldn't ask for better seniors and senpai. You couldn't ask for, Joseph and Darrell and, Alice. And all these people were, just the most fantastic martial artists and human beings. It was amazing. So I know that the Uchideshi experience and the Sotodeshi experience have a lot of crossover. So how did you end up falling into a Sotodeshi experience, which is a tremendous commitment for someone to make, especially having a professional career with Main Sensei?
Yeah, great question. It's funny because it wasn't nearly as structured and formalized as an Uchideshi program, and even other Sotodeshi programs. To be quite honest, when I signed up for Aikido, he was going over the memberships, and he's like, "Here's what it is for a month." I'm like, "No, what's the next PEP plan?" "Well, here's 6 months." No, what's the one after that? We can do a year. No, what's the one after that? What's the biggest one you have? And I'm a business guy. I'm like, if I commit the most, my cost savings per month should go down. That's what I was thinking.
Right.
I'll throw it on a credit card. I don't have any money. That's fine. So I basically, my first day on the mat was my first day. He didn't know it, but I committed to 3 years essentially upfront and paid. And that's kind of how it went down. But it was very much, similar to any new student joining, and yours that are joining monthly, that are Sotodeshis, or just students or committed students, whatever. You just kind of stumbling along and figure out where things go and what you're doing. But to me, it was simply, I committed to him. I liked him. And fast forward to 20 years later, like, he's one of my closest friends. We talk every day. We still, kind of like you and I, when we talk, the first thing out of our mouth is a joke. Like, it's not even, "Hey, what's going on? How are you?" Yeah. So he does that to me every day. I do that to him every day. We just start laughing, and we talk about the dojo and running the dojo and whatnot. So that was kind of it. I mean, it really wasn't any, conversation where, let's figure this out. Let's draw this out. Here's your responsibility. It was just kind of all in, if you will. Even like 3 weeks into my training, I was already at a seminar. 5 weeks later, I was at winter camp, and it was supposed to go with another senior student that backed out last minute. So 5 weeks after I joined Aikido, I'm at winter camp by myself. So I was in, So let me ask you that.
Hook, line, and sinker.
Yeah, pretty much. To me, it was the best decision I ever made. And, I look back at it and just appreciate, what that process was like. So, for you, what was your least favorite part about being in the Uchideshi program?
It's so funny because the things that you like, the things that you remember liking the least about being an Uchideshi are the things that you almost think about jokingly liking the least, because they're generally physical things that were strenuous. I don't remember anything ever being emotionally strenuous about the experience. Everybody, the community, one of the things about an Aikido dojo that's so unique, and I mean, traditional martial arts is like, I've noticed this, having been in martial arts literally from the time I can remember, but the communities are such a tight-knit thing. I mean, they're so supportive of each other that the emotional aspect is something that I've never come across a community that wasn't supportive. Especially with a good teacher, and Stigl Sensei was a great teacher. But I mean, the fact that he didn't like leaving the heat on at night in winter, that kind of stunk. He would tell me in winter time that Uchideshis weren't worthy of heating. So the rule of thumb was to save money. After the last class would end, the thermostat had to be turned down, and then at 5 a.m. before morning class, I was allowed to turn it up in time for 6 a.m. class. So,
gotcha.
And that was really only a problem for the first week or two before I, learned my lesson and asked for a sleeping bag from a very gracious family member. And corrected that issue. But I mean, things like that. Usually it's physical things like that. I mean,
Sure.
The learning how to nurse injuries is a necessity. I mean, there's no downtime. There's no, as opposed to regimented fitness routines where you can build in recovery days, right?
Right.
Where I'm going to beat my body up for 5 days and then take 2 days off for my body to rebuild itself. An Uchideshi program is, at least 3 classes on an off day, like a Saturday or a Sunday. And then the big days are, 5 plus classes plus private lessons, and you're taking ukemi, your body's getting beaten to death all day long. And so learning how to take care of your body and learning how to tell people, no, I'm not going to hang out with you. And being okay with that, was a struggle, but, at the beginning,
Gotcha.
but you learn. Yeah, for sure. So this is something, I was hesitant to ask this one actually, because, it edges a little bit towards the personal, but I don't care. What did your wife, but I think it's important because, as dojo chos think about this, as dojo owners are thinking about, when people walk into their dojos and they're interested in doing Aikido, and when people think about doing Aikido for the first time in general, they're usually thinking about this from the lens of, how is my significant other going to think about me doing this? How are family members going to think about me doing this? So when you were, when you were basically committing yourself to 3 years of daily training of Aikido, I mean, what did Amy think about this? Like, what did your wife think about you suddenly disappearing for hours a day?
Yeah,
basically.
I think it's a great question, and I don't have one planned for you, but now you gave me one to ask about Teresa. Thank you. But honestly, and you can totally attest to this because I believe you met your wife in Aikido. It then wasn't your wife, but so I use this quote, but like 90% of your success in life is based upon marrying the right person. And I had the right person. She didn't need to be convinced. She also knows that I'm pretty strong-minded. And when I don't commit to everything, I don't say I'm not the guy that tries this one month, tries that next month, does this, does that. When I decide I'm going to do something, it's all in. So the timing was good too. We didn't have kids. We don't have kids now. She was just starting pharmacy school. So she was basically, we'd been dating for, 5 years at the time. And she was going off to Chapel Hill to learn to be a pharmacist. So I was, the timing was good because she had her thing up there. And I basically had my job at the time was a typical 9 to 5. And then I had Aikido. That was it. I didn't play golf. I didn't work out in the gym. I wasn't, playing piano, doing music lessons. It was that. So it was a great experience for me. And, I sometimes take that for granted. And it's hard sometimes to look at that when I'm looking at new students that are really talented. They have a great attitude, and I wish they would come more. It's taken me 20 years to realize that your family comes first. And a lot of times the family could be 4 kids and they all have their sports, and you got to drive one here, drive one there. So it's a big time commitment. So I applaud, students today that are able to make it to the mat, consistently each week when they have additional responsibilities, as long as, they can look in the mirror and honestly say, this is for me and here's how I'm going to do it. Because I think you can agree, a lot of people, whether it's learning Aikido or working out or, doing whatever, the autoresponder is, I don't have time. And my response is, well, you had 24 hours yesterday in your day, and I have the same 24 hours. Just, it's maybe not a commitment for you. It's not a priority, but you have the time to do it if you can manage your time and commit to being there, and you have the right personal circumstances, back to what you said. So, so this isn't prepared, but I want to ask you, with Teresa, you guys, and 2 years later, Amy and I got married, and obviously the rest is history. But you started your dojo 3 or 4 years ago.
No, 5. It'll be 5 years. We started in 2016.
Okay,
so it'll be 5 years ago this January.
Coming up on 5, hitting 5 years. Gotcha. So so what was that like for you? And now you have a little one. Tell me about
Yeah.
for you, what would just the starting a dojo and getting your wife to buy in to that, because it takes you away from the family.
Yeah, without doubt. So, I actually, so I met Teresa outside of the dojo
Okay.
when I was still doing musical theater. So I was
Ah,
doing musical theater, and we met through a mutual friend who was also doing musical theater. And Teresa wasn't in that world; she was sort of in a tangential corporate world. Um, but I very quickly realized when I was when I was doing Aikido, I realized that Aikido was going to be such a big part of my life. I was at least I had the foresight to know that it was going to be such a big part of my life that I needed to have a partner who at least appreciated the art enough to support the fact that not only was Aikido going to be a big part of my life, but martial arts in general has been such a big part of my life since I was 4 that it's simply an integral part of who I am. Like it's a pillar of, I mean, because I've been doing it since I was 4 years old in some form or another, it's literally a pillar of my personality, right? So it's not a question of this thing I added at a point in my life
right.
that became an important part of my life, right? I didn't add it as a priority out of an interest that then developed into a passion. It literally was this built-in thing that I've been doing because I was put into it, right?
It's in your DNA.
And then it just, yeah. And so I brought her to her first class, and then I basically threw her sort of to the wolves. So I took her to ASNJ, and she didn't have a uniform, and so I let her borrow one of mine, which of course was all tattered and old. And
I know where this is going.
This is terrible. I think did I tell you this story?
No, but this is a story that happens. You hear all the time.
Oh my God. So this is the story. One of the pillars or one of the cornerstones that made me realize that I was going to marry this woman. So for good or ill, I don't know if this is a good reason to marry someone or not, but it was one of my reasons. So we go and we train it, and from the beginning of class, I in my mind went, I'm not training with Teresa tonight. She's to the wolves. I send her to the close to the Kamiza, where she has to train with all of the high ranking people. She's literally not trained. She's been training under 6 months, right? To the wolves. Just these are people who just want to throw down. And within 15 minutes, she gets pulled into a riminage and whipped around, turns over her ankle. Within the first 15 minutes of class, and two things happen. One, it's clear she's turned her ankle. I don't know anything that's happened yet. She finishes the class on a messed up foot. We don't know what's happened to this foot yet. We just know that she's turned her ankle. She hobbles off the mat at the end of class, and come to find out later, she's hairline fractured the bones in the bottom of her foot in a straight line. She's in a boot for a month. And everybody finds out about this at the dojo, and they all come up to me and they go, you realize this woman gets on the mat for you, breaks her foot within the first 15 minutes of class, finishes the class, and then gets off the mat with you and stays with you. You better marry her.
That's awesome.
And so the fact that, and a lot of that had to do with not just the fact that, I mean, obviously, we had a great relationship, but the fact that she really enjoyed her training to that extent was very, very meaningful to me. And I think to your point, having someone who, whether they believe in the art or not, that 90% is, I mean, it's so true. Having somebody who's in your corner, who's supporting those passions in your life, who's supporting your mission. I mean, it's without it, you're truly doomed to failure.
That's an awesome story.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So when you were Sotodeshi, did your responsibilities change at all? What were you generally, were you generally responsible for the same things? I mean, I know that you mentioned that a lot of it had to do with what you were responsible for outside of the training. And was that generally the same thing from week to week, or did that change over the course of the years that you were Sotodeshi?
Once it was obvious that I never missed a class, and I didn't for
Sure.
3 years, I trained 7 days. I think I had 33 seminars back then too in the first 3 years, which, as you may or may not know, 20 years ago, pre-COVID-19, there wasn't as many seminars each week. There were seminars, but some were outside the organization. So it's kind of I guess it was averaging once a month over 3 years, a little less than once a month. So the responsibilities really just evolved as I advanced in rank too. I think at 2 years in, I was probably second Q, first Q, because I had so much mat time, and I just, I'd learned all the Q techniques for testing like way in advance of the actual test. So I was leading, and actually at second Q in our dojo, I was leading a Sunday class with 15 fifth and fourth Qs, believe it or not. So those responsibilities were added, where I was asked to teach weekly on a Sunday afternoon class, and then just normal other stuff. Just, as you evolve and your skills improve, and you can relate as a very talented uke. I was the uke every class, the whole class. So that was a challenge for me. Not that you asked about challenges, because as you know, I suffer from chronic asthma since I was, 7 years old. So being uke, and I was a bigger guy then, being uke for every technique, and then going to train, and then back and forth, you never get a rest. So
Sure.
it's just things like that. And then again, essentially indirectly, not taught, not formalized, you kind of learn to be otomo for your chief instructor. So it was taking care of him financially too, in seminars back then, and some now, and making sure you hold the door for him when he walks into a new dojo, and you're carrying his equipment, and you're there when you need it, and you're not over the top. It's a lot about, like, the biggest thing I learned was how to listen more and not talk so much, because as a type A extrovert sales training New Yorker,
I don't know anything about that.
You know nothing about that. You have to sit back and know when is the right time to talk, when is, listen more.
100%.
You have 2 years in one mouth was essentially the biggest training thing. So what I want to ask you, that was a big convoluted and all over the place, but what I wanted to ask you was, what is one thing that you learned as an Uchideshi back then to something that you're still doing today in your dojo?
So it's so interesting. When we were sort of talking about doing a conversation about the Deshi experience, Uchi or Soto, the timing around when Stickle Sensei passed and everything, you think about all of your experiences and all the things that you know that you'll obviously miss out on being able to do in the future, that you were able to do. Like, for example, one of the things that cleaning. I mean, you never, the number one thing that you're responsible for that I think that you benefit from the most, especially if your goal is to become an instructor and to have a dojo, or really to own any business where people are touching each other in a martial way, right? Whether it's grappling or striking arts or anything like that, is if you want to have people moving in a space, a space has to be kept clean. And the first time that you open a space, it's really just you. You may benefit from having a partner who supports you, who may help you in that endeavor, or you may have a student or two early on who may be helping you out. But the reality is that, you're responsible for that. And more than that, there's this Japanese concept of misogi, this idea that, in cleaning the space that you occupy for your training, it actually has this purifying effect, right? It's actually beneficial for you. Even in those moments where you're like, man, I can't believe I'm vacuuming this space and my own house, and I have to do all this work, and my students, And it's, I think that's the number one thing for me would have to be the discipline that it takes to maintain a space. The discipline and consistent effort, I think, would be the number one thing. Yeah, absolutely.
Interesting.
Yeah. Discipline and consistency would be the number one thing. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, were there things, I would imagine that with that wealth of experience and having been a student of Demko Sensei, that main sensei would have had to glean, wisdom and then of course garnered his own. Were there, 1, 2, or 3 things that you really picked up on that have really impacted you, specifically from the Sotodeshi experience, that you've taken into your role as a chief instructor?
Yeah. Yeah. So first, I want to just go back to what you were saying and applaud you, because I think it's, when I was starting my career in 95, I was in a management training course, and it was retail, and I kept getting relocated, moved around, promoted to new stores. And the one thing I learned is the first thing because you're going there as an assistant boss, the first thing you do when you show up to day one to meet the new team is you go clean the bathroom. Yeah. Because you're going to ask them to clean the bathroom. So you go clean the bathroom, they see that you're rolling up your sleeves. So I think, we both have similar dojo cultures where we have wonderful students. They really get it. They don't need to be sold on taking care of the dojo. But, as you have more responsibilities like we do, day to day in front of them, they don't see maybe a lot of that, but they don't know that days are not there. I'm in there cleaning. You're constantly cleaning your dojo. So I just applaud you on that, because it's one of those things where sometimes if you're not seeing it with your own eyes, people don't realize it's still happening, and it's a good model to have. I would say, the things that I learned, the 2 or 3 things are just, things that I've been fortunate to embrace today, even in this series that we're doing, is, Aikido to me is about trying to pursue a journey of becoming a better version of yourself in all walks of life. So, my teacher is a great example of that, because, he's like the most non-political guy. He just wants to train. Everybody loves him. He's like a big teddy bear. He's always smiling. There's no drama. And, I look at that sometimes because I can be a little knee jerk. I can be a little impulsive. I can act with emotion sometimes. And he's definitely more blending and harmonizing when it comes to conflicts or potential conflicts. So, that's one of the things I learned. And I think Demko Sensei and I are wired a little more similar to Main Sensei, believe it or not. And we talk a lot. So, there's that piece. And then there's just, the relationship building. Like I took it upon myself early on, going back to what I said, is to show up, train hard. Don't be the junior guy running his mouth, listen, ask questions. Don't talk about yourself. Ask questions to these wise people that have been training, for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. And you'll learn, it's not just about Aikido. You'll learn about life. You'll pick up on things like that. So the biggest things that I learned, just to summarize, is, listen more, be humble, train hard. Humility is a thing we're working on all the time. Train hard, position yourself to where you can be a listener and then build those relationships. So beyond the mat, all these, back then it was top Shidoin. It wasn't Shihan, but like a lot of the TC Shihan are friends, and I can talk to, I can dial them up on the phone, and the board for that matter. So to me, that's the biggest takeaway, were those things. So I have one last question for you, my friend, and you can't say cleaning again, because I know you talked about.
It's probably not a wrong answer to whatever you're going to ask.
Yeah. So, and again, this is going to tie in. I think what you're going to ask me is, how can somebody benefit or dedicate themselves, in either program, if you will. But like, my question for you is, what is the biggest takeaway? Go back to your time with Stickle Sensei and ASNJ. What was your biggest takeaway besides cleaning and misogi that you learned that you apply in your dojo from all walks of life, whether it's this or that. Like it's something that it's a concept, it's a behavior that Sickle Sensei had, it's a program, it's, we share ideas back and forth on things. What one thing was the biggest thing that you took right into your new dojo 5 years ago?
Ooh.
That one was, I just made that up. That wasn't the one you knew you were going to get. Sorry.
No. No, I honestly, it's a fantastic question. And I try to think about, it whether I want it to or not every year. I imagine, like most things, it's possible that this will fade, but involuntarily, he jumps into my mind every year around May, and this thought jumps into my head, like what am I most grateful for? And we had so many pivotal conversations throughout not only my Uchideshi experience, but then periodically thereafter. And the last most meaningful one was actually totally unexpected, where he unprovoked, knew I was coming up for summer camp, and found out that I was going to land in Newark, and that I wasn't like completely settled on where I was going to stay the night before I drove down from Newark Airport to Galloway for camp. And he said, "It's no problem. Stay at the dojo, and and then drive down in the morning." And then I landed in Newark, and he called me, found out when I landed. I mean, literally called me when I landed, and said, "Are you here?" And I said, "What do you mean here?" And he found out, come to find that he came to pick me up at the airport, drove me to the dojo, and said, "I'll come get you in the morning. We'll drive together." And then we had the full 2.5 hours together in the car, talking about the dojo, talking about putting together a successful dojo. And to me, the undercurrent of all of that is that level of consistent attention to relationships. That idea that whether it's teacher student or student to student or senpai kohai or senior junior, or whatever the relationship is that you build in the Aikido community, I think it's something to be cherished. It's something that's truly significant, and something not to throw away lightly.
Yeah.
And if there's an opportunity to communicate, take it, and assume that there's going to be a loving, open reception to that communication. Assume that there's going to be an opportunity, not just for reconciliation, but for expansion of that relationship. Assume that there's going to be an opportunity, no matter where it begins, that that relationship's going to in fact grow from wherever it is. Even if it starts in a really great place, it's only going to get better. If it starts in a really dark place, it's only going to get better. That's just the nature of our Aikido community.
That's great.
So I think one way that we could kind of tie this whole thing together for the student who, practically speaking, isn't 17, 18, 19 years old, doesn't have 2-3+ hours a day to be a dojo rat, to just be hanging out at the dojo all the time, and commit themselves to that level, but has the same level of passion. They really do have that same level of passion, but their priorities simply cannot shift to that level. But they do have that level of passion. They do want to prioritize it as much as they can. What are 2 or 3 things that your experience as a Sotodeshi gave you, and then you're blended with your experiences now with Main Sensei and Demko Sensei, and of course all your other experiences running a dojo, that could help someone get as much of the benefits from leveraging their passion, but being a regular student?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's hard sometimes, and you can relate to this because you see a student that has tremendous potential. Just things you kind of see yourself when you started in a lot of these people, and
Sure.
they have this determination to try and to learn. Like I'm always impressed with people that have the best attitudes, that just want to try, not the most talented people that can do these crazy things.
Yeah.
That doesn't impress me. What impresses me is the person that just never gives up. So like the things that I learned that I try to that I can share with people that maybe aren't looking at indirectly or directly the track that you took or that I took, is just be real and honest with yourself. Ask yourself weekly, why are you doing Aikido? And the answer may change over time, but if you get enjoyment out of it, it gives you some exercise, you love the concepts of what Aikido is about off the mat, then the biggest thing that you have to do is don't stay away too long. Don't, I think the stat is like 2% of anybody that starts a martial art ever reach Shodan, first degree black belt, because of it's a big commitment it's 5-7. If you're BJJ, it's 10 plus years. So, people can't see that distance. And again, I don't want to get hung up on rank, but Shodan in martial arts, and specifically Aikido, is a big deal because it's a stamp that you completed the first basic commitment that you need to call yourself a serious student, whether it takes 5 years, 10 years. So, once you get to that point, a lot of the Shihan say this, but you've now earned the right to start learning for real and to start practicing at a high level. So my advice is just don't take your eye off the ball. Not everybody has Shodan as a goal, but a lot of people do. And don't get hung up on the time. Don't get hung up on the ranks. Don't get hung up on the seminars and the tests. Just get hung up on not staying too far away from the dojo. And life happens, you lose your job, you have a kid, this family member needs this. It's tough. And it's okay to walk away from the dojo. But when you walk away, think of it as a rotating door, a revolving door, and it's going to point you back in the direction of the dojo. So that's my take, is if you can look at it like that every week when you're training, then you'll never quit. And that's back tying up to the stat of, less than 2% of all people that start a martial art make it to Shodan, is essentially saying that less than 2% of people stay as a student for 5 to 10 years, like consistently. That's what that means. So if you stay consistent and you put the mat time in and you build the relationships, you'll get so much more out of the art than you ever thought imagine. You'll get so much more out of everything. So that's kind of, I don't know if that was 2 or 3 things, but that was certainly the big message that I learned, for that matter.